man walking toward me across the binding hall was not what I had been promised. I stood on the altar platform in full ceremonial silver, my spine straight, my chin raised, my blood running cold with a fury I could barely contain. The hall was filled with every noble house in the Valorian sovereignty. 300 seats, every one of them occupied. My father sat on his throne above us all, watching with an expression I could not read. My mother would not look at me. She had not looked at me since the announcement 3 weeks ago, when my father told me what I would be doing with the rest of my life. My sisters sat with their hands folded, and their eyes low, grateful beyond words that they had not been chosen for this. And the human kept walking toward me. He was shorter than any Valorian male by nearly a full head. His skin was a warm, unsettling brown, instead of the silver blue that marked every member of my species. He wore borrowed ceremonial armor that did not fit him properly. The chest plate was too wide. The gauntlets hung loose at his wrists. The greaves had been adjusted with temporary clips that were visible to anyone who looked closely, and everyone was looking closely. He looked like a child playing dress-up in his father's war gear, and I wanted to scream at my father for doing this to me. My name is Savari Kaldeth. I am the third daughter of Sovereign Empress Valeth Kaldeth, ruler of 11 star systems and commander of the most ancient fleet in the known galaxy. My bloodline stretches back 9,000 years. I have been trained in diplomacy, stellar navigation, fleet doctrine, and the old language since I could walk, and my father traded me to the humans like a piece of cargo. The war with the Drake Dominion had been grinding on for 6 years. We were losing, though no one in the court would say it aloud. Our fleets were beautiful, precise, and outnumbered 3 to 1. The Drake bred faster than they died, and they fought with a swarming, insectile coordination that our elegant battle formations could not answer. We had lost 2 border systems in the last year alone. Supply lines were stretching thin. Our best commanders were being rotated off the front lines because they were making mistakes born from exhaustion, and the replacements were younger and less experienced each time. My father had reached out to the Terran Confederation in desperation, and the alliance they brokered came with a price I was expected to pay in silence. A political marriage, a bonding between royal Valorian blood and a human military representative. A symbol of unity between our species that would cement the treaty in a way no document could. I was chosen because I was expendable. Third daughters do not inherit. Third daughters do not command fleets. Third daughters smile, attend ceremonies, and do as they are told. So here I was, watching a human walk toward me in armor that did not fit, about to bind my life to a species the galaxy considered barely civilized. His name was Declan Holt, Commander, Terran Confederation Armed Forces. That was all I had been told. No service record. No background briefing. No explanation for why this particular human out of billions had been selected to become the husband of a Valorian princess. Just a name, a rank, and a date for the ceremony. He reached the platform and stopped. I looked down at him because I was taller, and I let him see exactly what I thought of this arrangement. He looked back at me with dark eyes that moved too much. They swept left, right, up to the balconies, across the crowd, back to me. It was unsettling, like watching a prey animal scan for threats. I had seen that kind of restless attention in cornered animals on the hunting reserves of Vel Prime, and I hated that my future husband reminded me of something I might have once tracked for sport. The binding priest began the ceremony. The old words filled the hall, heavy with 9,000 years of tradition, and I spoke my part from memory, because I had rehearsed it until my voice went raw the night before. Not from devotion, from the determination that I would not stumble. I would not give the court the satisfaction of seeing me falter. When it was Declan's turn to speak the old words, he butchered them. His tongue could not wrap around the harmonic undertones that gave Old Valorian its meaning. The words came out flat, clumsy, stripped of their resonance. I heard several nobles behind me make sounds of barely concealed contempt. Lord Vesson, my father's chief military advisor, actually turned his head away as though the sound physically offended him. But I noticed something. Declan's hands did not shake. Not once. Not even slightly. I had stood on this platform for 7 state ceremonies in my life. I had watched foreign dignitaries, allied commanders, and visiting royals stand where Declan stood, and every single one of them had trembled. The binding hall was built on a resonance foundation that amplified psychic energy. The weight of it pressed against unshielded minds like a hand on the chest. Valorians were born into it and barely noticed. Outsiders felt it immediately. I had seen a Kethrani ambassador lose consciousness on the third step. A Cerelian trade delegate had needed 2 aides to hold him upright during a 15-minute ceremony. Declan just stood there, calm, steady, mangling my language with that flat, toneless voice while his hands hung at his sides without the faintest tremor. I did not know what to make of that. The ceremony ended. The court applauded with the precise, measured rhythm that tradition demanded. My father rose and spoke words of unity and strength that I barely heard. Declan and I were escorted from the hall by palace guards who walked between us, as though we were 2 separate prisoners being led to the same cell. The consort wing of the palace was beautiful. It had been designed for Valorian royals and their chosen partners, filled with resonance pools, meditation alcoves, and walls that shifted color with the emotional state of whoever touched them. Declan's quarters were across the corridor from mine. The guards left us at the entrance and sealed the wing behind them. We were alone. I turned to face him and did not bother softening my voice. I told him exactly how this was going to work. This was a political arrangement, nothing more. He would have his quarters, access to certain areas of the palace, and a ceremonial title that carried no authority. He would not touch me. He would not speak for me in court. He would not pretend that this binding was anything other than a transaction between governments. I had rehearsed this speech as thoroughly as the ceremony, and I delivered it with the same precision. He listened without interrupting. He did not fidget. He did not look away. Those dark, restless eyes stayed on my face the entire time, and I realized with a start that he was not just hearing my words, he was reading me, studying my posture, my breathing, the micro-tensions in my jaw, the way a soldier reads a situation before deciding whether it is dangerous. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke. "Understood, Your Highness, but I should tell you something. I was not sent here to be a symbol. I was sent here because your father asked the Terran Confederation for someone who could keep you alive." I stared at him. "That is not what I was told," I said. "No," he agreed. "I imagine it was not." He said goodnight. He walked into his quarters. The door closed behind him. I stood in the corridor for a long time, trying to decide whether he was lying. My father had told me the marriage was political, a gesture of good faith, a bridge between species. He had not mentioned anything about protection. He had not mentioned danger. But my father was a strategist who had held an empire together for 30 years. He did not do things for one reason when he could accomplish 3 at once. And the look on Declan's face when he spoke had not been the look of a man reciting a diplomatic brief. It had been the look of a man stating a mission objective. I went to my chambers. I did not sleep well. It was the vibration that woke me. A low, subsonic pulse that traveled through the palace walls and settled in my teeth. I sat up in the dark, every nerve suddenly alive. I knew that frequency. Every Valorian royal was trained to recognize it from childhood. It was a Drake stealth probe, a scanning pulse designed to map the interior of a structure, count the biosignatures inside, and relay the data back to a command ship hidden somewhere beyond sensor range. The Drake were scanning the palace. I reached for the communications panel beside my bed to alert security. My hand never reached it. The door to my chamber was already open, and Declan was standing in it. He was fully armored, not the borrowed ceremonial plate from the ceremony, but real combat gear, matte black and close-fitting, with a Terran sidearm drawn and held low against his thigh. He was facing the corridor, not me. His body was positioned in the doorway so that nothing could enter without going through him first. He had heard the probe. Somehow, impossibly, he had felt it, identified it, armed himself, and reached my door before I had finished sitting up in bed. "How did you?" I started. "Later," he said quietly. His voice was different now, flat, controlled. Every trace of the awkward treaty husband who had butchered my language at the altar was gone. The man in my doorway was something else entirely. "Stay behind me. I am a princess of the oldest bloodline in the galaxy. I do not take orders from anyone below the rank of sovereign." But something in his voice, in the absolute stillness of his body, in the way his eyes moved through the darkness like he could see in it, stopped the argument in my throat. I got out of bed. I moved behind him. And for the first time since my father told me I was being given to a human, I felt something other than anger. I did not know the word for it yet, but it was quiet, and it was steady, and it sat in my chest like a stone. Much later, I would learn that the word was safe. The security detail arrived 11 minutes after Declan took position at my door. 11 minutes. I counted every one. In that time, Declan did not move, did not waver, and did not take his eyes off the corridor. When Commander Resick of the Palace Guard arrived with a full tactical squad, he found a human standing in the doorway of the royal consort chamber, with a weapon drawn, and a look on his face that made Resick's squad slow their approach despite outnumbering him 12-1. Resick asked Declan to stand down. Declan asked Resick to confirm the compound was secure first. They stared at each other for a long moment, and I watched something pass between them that I had only ever seen between soldiers. It was not friendship, it was recognition. Resick confirmed the compound was secure. Declan holstered his weapon and stepped aside. As the guards swept my chambers, Declan turned to me. He was calm again. The soldier was still there behind his eyes, but the immediate edge had softened. The probe mapped biosignatures, he said. Not defensive positions, not weapon emplacements. They were counting people, Your Highness, identifying specific individuals by their biological readings. Why? I asked, though the cold weight settling in my stomach told me I already knew. Because they are not planning to attack the palace, he said. They are planning to take someone from it. He looked at me with those dark, steady eyes, and I understood what he was not saying. They were planning to take me. I did not sleep again that night. I sat in my chamber with the lights on and the door open, and I watched the shadow of Declan Holt standing guard in the corridor across from me. He did not sit down. He did not lean against the wall. He stood with that impossible human stillness, hour after hour, watching the corridor with eyes that never stopped moving. And I thought about what my father had really done when he asked the Terran Confederation for someone who could keep his daughter alive. He had sent me a human, and I was beginning to wonder if the galaxy had any idea what that actually meant. The morning after the probe, I walked into the emergency session of the Valorian Security Council and took my seat in the observers gallery above the main floor. The chamber was carved from a single block of resonance crystal, and the walls hummed with a frequency designed to sharpen focus and suppress emotional interference. 22 senior military commanders, intelligence directors, and noble house representatives sat in a wide crescent around the central projection table. My father occupied the sovereign's chair at the head, elevated above the rest, his expression locked behind the diplomatic mask he had worn for as long as I could remember. Declan sat beside me in the gallery. He had no speaking authority. He had no rank that the council recognized. He was, as far as every Valorian in that room was concerned, a political ornament attached to the third princess. Most of them did not bother looking at him. I looked at him. He was studying the tactical displays projected above the central table, with an intensity that did not belong on the face of a ceremonial consort. His eyes tracked the fleet positions, the scanning data from the probe, the projected Drake patrol routes along the border sectors. I watched his jaw tighten slightly when Commander Resick presented the preliminary analysis, and I saw his fingers press flat against his knee when Lord Vesson proposed a defensive redeployment that would pull 3 destroyer groups back from the outer perimeter. He disagreed. I could see it in his body. Every muscle held still by discipline, but the disagreement was there, written in the tension of his hands and the way his breathing changed. The council debated for 2 hours. Their strategies were layered, elegant, and slow. Counterprobe sweeps would take 3 days to deploy. A diplomatic inquiry to the Drake's dominion through neutral channels would take a week. The redeployment Lord Vesson proposed would require 6 days of fleet repositioning. Everything moved at the pace of tradition, procedure, and consensus. When the session ended and the chamber began to empty, Declan leaned toward me and spoke in a voice so low that even the resonance crystal could not carry it beyond our seats. Your Highness, I need to speak with you privately. We walked to a terrace overlooking the western gardens, where the ambient resonance of the palace walls was thinnest and eavesdropping was nearly impossible. Declan stood at the railing and looked out over the gardens as though he were admiring the view, but his eyes were doing that thing again, scanning the perimeter, checking the rooftops, cataloging the guard positions on the walls below us. "The council is wrong," he said. "About what, specifically?" I asked. I kept my voice neutral. I was not in the habit of entertaining critiques of Valorian military leadership from outsiders, but the events of the previous night had earned him a hearing. "About what the Drachik are planning. They are not preparing for a fleet engagement. They are not even scouting for one. That probe was a targeting scan. It mapped personnel biosignatures inside this compound, identified individuals by species, rank, and biological markers, and transmitted the data on a narrowband frequency designed for tactical extraction teams." I folded my arms. "How could you possibly know the transmission protocol of a Drachik stealth probe?" "Because humans fought a species called the Keth for 11 years, he said. The Keth used identical technology, same scanning frequencies, same data compression methods, same narrowband burst transmission to a handler ship in stealth orbit. We lost 4 heads of state and 9 military commanders before we learned to read the pattern. I can read it the way your navigators read stellar drift. It is not analysis. It is instinct built from losing people I was supposed to protect." Something in the way he said that last sentence made me pause. There was no self-pity in it, no drama, just the flat statement of a man who had carried a weight for a long time and had stopped pretending it was not heavy. "You believe they are planning a kidnapping," I said. "I know they are. The biosignature scan was not random. It focused on the residential sections of the compound, not the military or administrative wings. They are building a target profile. They want to know exactly where specific individuals sleep, eat, and spend their private hours. That is not intelligence gathering for a military assault. That is preparation for a surgical extraction." "And the target?" He looked at me, and the answer was so obvious he did not say it. I brought his analysis to my father that evening. I presented it as my own observation, supplemented by data from the Terran military liaison. My father listened. He asked 2 questions, both about the reliability of cross-species pattern analysis. Then he dismissed it as human paranoia, pointed out that the Drach had never attempted an extraction operation inside Valorian sovereign territory in the entire history of the war, and reminded me that the palace compound was protected by 3 overlapping shield grids and the finest guard force in the galaxy. I left his chambers knowing that he was wrong and not knowing what to do about it. Over the following days, I began watching Declan. Not with the contempt I had felt at the binding ceremony, not with the cold assessment I had used during our first conversation. I watched him the way I had been trained to watch potential threats, with attention, patience, and the willingness to revise my assumptions based on what I observed. What I observed disturbed me. He adapted to the palace with a speed that should not have been possible for an outsider. Within 3 days, he knew the guard rotation schedules better than I did. He had memorized the corridor layout of the entire consort wing and the 2 adjacent sections. He could tell me which doors locked from the inside, which locked from the outside, and which ones did not lock at all, because the mechanisms had been decorative for centuries and no one had bothered to repair them. He identified structural weaknesses in the compound walls that our engineers had not flagged, places where centuries of renovation had left gaps between old construction and new, spaces large enough for a determined intruder to exploit. He pointed out blind spots in the surveillance grid that existed because the system had been designed to monitor for external threats and had never been reconfigured to detect internal movement through service corridors. He found maintenance tunnels that were not on any current security map because they predated the most recent palace expansion by 400 years and had simply been forgotten. He did all of this without being asked, without making a show of it, and without telling anyone except me. The food was another thing. Valorian cuisine contained trace compounds that were mildly toxic to human biology, amino acid chains that our digestive systems processed easily, but that could cause inflammation and organ stress in species with different metabolic pathways. I discovered this by accident when I saw him discreetly swallowing a small capsule before each meal. I asked him what it was. He told me it was an enzyme supplement that neutralized the harmful elements in our food so he could eat whatever was served without requiring special preparation. "Why not simply request human-compatible meals?" I asked. "The kitchen staff would accommodate you." "Because accommodation creates inconvenience," he said. "Inconvenience creates resentment, and I would rather take a pill than give anyone in this palace another reason to see me as a burden." I did not know how to respond to that. No one in my court had ever prioritized being unobtrusive. Valorians moved through the world expecting it to reshape itself around them. Declan moved through the world, reshaping himself to fit, absorbing discomfort silently, so that no one else would have to adjust. I began watching him train. Every morning, before the first sun cleared the horizon, he was in the lower courtyard, running combat drills alone. I watched from my balcony, wrapped in a sleeping robe, telling myself I was merely assessing a potential security asset. His fighting style was nothing like ours. Valorian combat was fluid, precise, and beautiful. It was built on superior speed, superior reflexes, and the certainty that a Valorian warrior would always be faster and stronger than their opponent. Declan's style was the opposite of everything I had been taught to admire. It was brutal, compact, and ugly. There was no grace in it, no flourish, no wasted motion. Every strike was aimed at a vulnerable point. Every block flowed directly into a counterattack. Every movement served one purpose, and one purpose only: ending the fight as fast as possible regardless of what it cost him to do it. I watched him throw himself at a training post for 40 minutes without stopping. His fists and elbows and knees struck the reinforced padding in combinations that had no aesthetic value but carried a density of force that I could hear from 3 floors above. He was drenched in sweat. His breathing was ragged. He did not stop. And I realized something that made my breath catch. His style was not ugly because it was unsophisticated. It was ugly because it was designed for a species that was slower, weaker, and more fragile than almost everything it fought. Humans had not developed combat arts for dominance. They had developed them for survival. Every technique assumed you were the underdog. Every drill prepared you for the moment when you were outmatched, outgunned, and out of options, and had to win anyway. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen on a training floor. The formal court dinner happened on the 5th evening after our binding. Attendance was mandatory for all bonded pairs of noble standing, and for the first time, Declan and I were required to appear together as a unit. I dressed in full court silver. He wore the borrowed ceremonial armor again, and again it did not fit. I saw Lord Vessen's smirk when we entered. I heard the whispers trailing us like shadows as we walked to the high table. We sat. Declan ate carefully, took his enzyme capsule when no one was looking, and said nothing unless spoken to directly. He was invisible in the way that only someone with extensive training in hostile environments could be. Not timid, not meek, just still, observing, cataloging, learning. Lord Vessen decided to make a spectacle. He stood during the 3rd course, raised his glass, and addressed Declan with the kind of smile that had sharp edges hidden in it. "Commander Holt," he said, loud enough for the entire hall to hear, "we have heard so much about human customs. Perhaps you would honor us with a demonstration, a parlor trick if you will, something to entertain the court." The hall went quiet. Every eye turned to Declan. I felt heat rise in my throat. Vessen was humiliating him deliberately, invoking the galaxy-wide stereotype of humans as performing animals, clever enough to be amusing, but not sophisticated enough to be taken seriously. I expected Declan to flush with anger. I expected him to stammer or stiffen or drop his gaze. I was already preparing to intervene, to deflect the insult with some diplomatic phrase that would let us both save face. Declan smiled. He stood up. He picked up his glass, and he said, "We do have a custom, Lord Vessen. We call it a toast." The hall was silent. Vessen's smile flickered with uncertainty. Declan raised his glass and spoke clearly, without hurry, without anger, without the slightest tremor in his voice. "Where I come from," he said, "we tell a story before we drink. So here is mine. A soldier once walked into a court full of people who thought he was nothing. They laughed at his armor. They mocked his language. They placed bets on how long he would last before he broke. That soldier stood there and took it because he had not been sent to impress them. He had been sent to protect them. And when the night came that something terrible walked through their doors, that soldier was the only one in the room who did not run. He paused. The hall was so quiet, I could hear the resonance hum of the crystal walls. The people in that room never learned his name, Declan said, but they were alive to not learn it. And he considered that enough. He drank. He sat down. Lord Vesson stood with his glass still raised and nothing to say. The silence held for a long, uncomfortable moment, before conversation resumed, and I noticed that several of the younger officers at the lower tables were looking at Declan with expressions I had not seen directed at a human in this palace before. Not contempt, not pity. Something closer to the look a young warrior gives a veteran whose scars tell stories that rank insignia cannot. Something had shifted, not in the room, in me. Sitting beside this man who had just turned a public humiliation into something that stole the air from the lungs of every noble in the hall, I felt a crack form in the wall I had built between us. Not affection, not trust. Something harder to name than either of those things. Recognition, the understanding that I had made an assumption about what he was, and I had been wrong. I did not speak to him about it. I did not thank him for the toast, or tell him I had been moved by it. I was still a princess of the Caldeth bloodline, and I was not ready to admit that a human had earned my respect. But he had. That night, I fell asleep earlier than usual. The court dinner had been exhausting in ways I had not anticipated, and the shifting currents of my own feelings had left me drained. The sound that woke me was not a vibration this time. It was plasma fire. The shriek of superheated energy splitting air filled the eastern corridor, followed immediately by the heavy thud of a body hitting a wall. I heard shouting in Valorian, and a sound beneath it that I did not recognize, a clicking, rasping vocalization that made the hair on my arms stand upright. Drakshek. The Drach were inside the palace. My door burst open, and Declan was there, already armored, already moving. He crossed my chamber in 3 strides, grabbed my arm, and pulled me off the bed with a force that was not gentle. "They are here," he said. "Extraction team. 8 operatives, maybe more. They came through tunnels under the Eastern Foundation, right through the section the Security Council did not know existed." "How do you know this?" I demanded, though my heart was hammering so loud I could barely hear my own voice. "Because I mapped those tunnels 4 days ago, and left proximity sensors in 3 of them." He pressed something into my hands. Cold metal. Compact, heavy, a Terran sidearm. "Point and squeeze, no safety. It will fire every time you pull. Stay behind me and do not stop moving, no matter what you hear." I had never held a weapon like this. Valorian personal arms were elegant things, integrated into armor systems and activated by neural link. This was a blunt, mechanical instrument that felt like it had been designed by people who expected everything to go wrong and built their tools accordingly. More plasma fire echoed down the corridor. Closer now. I could hear the distinctive snap of Valorian guard weapons answering, and then silence. The kind of silence that meant the guards had stopped firing. "Stay behind me," Declan said again, and then he moved. I have watched Valorian warriors train since I was a child. I have attended combat demonstrations, fleet exercises, and martial exhibitions, where the finest soldiers in the sovereignty displayed abilities that made audiences gasp with admiration. None of it prepared me for what I saw when Declan Holt went to war inside my home. He moved through the palace corridors like he had been born in them. Every turn, every junction, every doorway, he knew them all. He had spent 5 days memorizing this place, with the obsessive precision of a man who had always known this night would come, and now that it was here, he navigated the compound like it was an extension of his own body. The first Drake operative appeared at the end of the northern corridor. It was taller than Declan by a full head, encased in dark chitin armor that was half biological and half technological, with 4 jointed arms, and a plasma blade humming in its primary grip. Its mandibles clicked in that rapid, rasping pattern that was the Drachic equivalent of combat communication, signaling to its team that targets had been located. I froze. My hands locked around the sidearm, and my legs refused to move. Every instinct told me to run, to hide, to put as many walls between me and that thing as possible. Declan did not freeze. He closed the distance in 2 strides. 2. I did not understand how a human could move that fast, how legs that were shorter and muscles that were weaker could cover ground with that kind of explosive force. The Drake swung its plasma blade in a horizontal arc that should have cut Declan in half. He ducked under it and came up inside the operative's guard, so close that its longer arms could not bring the blade to bear. The Drake slashed down with its secondary arms, claws extended. Declan blocked with his left forearm, taking the impact on his armor plating. I heard something crack, metal or bone, I could not tell. He did not flinch. He did not slow down. His right hand came up and struck the Drake in a precise point behind its lower mandible. A nerve cluster, I realized later. He had studied their anatomy. He knew exactly where to hit and exactly how hard. The operative dropped. The whole encounter lasted less than 4 seconds. Declan stepped over the body and kept moving. I stared at the dead Drake on the floor, then at the human walking away from it, and my legs finally remembered how to work. I ran after him. The next corridor was worse. 2 Drake operatives came at us from a service junction, one high and one low, coordinating their approach with that clicking communication that let them move as a single unit. The engagement was savage and close. Declan fought with a brutality that made my stomach turn and my heart race simultaneously. There was no technique in the Valorian sense, no flowing sequences or elegant transitions. There was only violence, applied with mechanical precision to the specific points on the Drake body that would cause immediate incapacitation. He fought both of them at once, using the corridor walls to limit their ability to flank him, forcing them into each other's lines of attack. He took a slash across his ribs from a secondary blade that cut through his armor and drew a line of bright red across his side. He took a plasma graze on his right shoulder that scorched the fabric of his undersuit and left the skin beneath raw and blistering. He dislocated a finger on his left hand when a block landed at a bad angle, and I watched him grab it with his other hand and wrench it back into place mid-stride without breaking eye contact with the last standing operative. He kept fighting. When the second operative fell, he paused long enough to check the corridor in both directions, then looked down at his wounded side as though noticing it for the first time. "You are bleeding," I said. My voice sounded strange to me, high and thin. "I noticed," he said. "How can you keep going?" He looked at me with those dark, steady eyes and said something that I would remember for the rest of my life. "Humans do not stop when we are hurt. We stop when we are dead. Sometimes not even then." I could not tell if he was joking. His face gave me nothing. He led me through a maintenance tunnel that connected the consort wing to the central keep, a passage I had never known existed despite living in this palace for 26 years. He had found it during his mapping. He had probably found a dozen passages no one else knew about, filed them away in that relentless human brain, and waited for the night he would need them. The 4th Drake operative got past him. It happened in a junction, where 3 corridors met, and the angles were wrong for Declan to cover all of them at once. The operative came from the left, while Declan was engaging another from the right, and it moved straight for me with the focused, single-minded purpose of a predator locked on its target. I raised the sidearm. My hands were shaking so badly that the weapon trembled in my grip. The Drake was 5 meters away. 4. 3. I fired. The shot went wide and hit the wall, leaving a scorched crater in the ancient stone. I fired again. Missed. The Drake was 2 meters away, its primary arms reaching for me, mandibles spread wide, and I could see my own reflection in the dark, glossy surface of its compound eyes. I fired a 3rd time. The shot hit the operative in the center of its thorax. It staggered, its forward momentum broken. Its arms dropped. For a single second, it swayed on its feet, and in that second, Declan was there, coming from behind it, ending it with a strike so fast I barely saw his hand move. The corridor went quiet. Declan looked at me. He was bleeding from multiple wounds. His left arm hung at an angle that suggested his shoulder had been damaged. His breathing was ragged and sharp, and through all of it, those dark eyes found mine with a clarity that seemed impossible for a man who should have been on the floor. "Good shot," he said. And standing there in a dark corridor surrounded by dead Drake, holding a human weapon in my shaking hands, I realized that it was the first genuine compliment anyone had given me in years. Not for my bloodline, Not for my title. Not for the political value of my existence. For something I had actually done. I wanted to cry, and I did not understand why. We reached the royal safe room 2 corridors later, and what we found there turned the fear in my chest into something colder and sharper. The safe room had been breached. The reinforced doors stood open, the locking mechanisms cut through with a precision tool that left the edges smooth and still warm. Inside, the Drache team leader was waiting. It was larger than the others, taller, broader, with cybernetic enhancements grafted into its chitin plating that pulsed with a faint blue light. Its 4 arms held weapons in 2, and the collars of Valorian palace guards in the other 2. 3 guards, alive, forced to their knees, their armor stripped, their faces blank with the controlled terror of soldiers who knew they were being used as leverage. 2 more Drache operatives flanked the team leader, covering the entrance with plasma rifles that tracked our arrival with automated precision. The team leader spoke in accented but functional galactic common. "Princess Kaldeth, you will come with us willingly, or these 3 will die. Your choice. You have 10 seconds. It was a calculated play, and it was devastating. Valorians valued honor above almost everything. We did not sacrifice our own. We did not trade lives. A Valorian princess watching her father's guards be executed in front of her, rather than surrender, would carry that shame to her grave and beyond it. The Drache knew this. They had studied us the way Declan had studied them, and they had found the weakness in our strength. I began to step forward. Declan's arm blocked my path. Hard, immovable, like walking into a wall that had appeared from nowhere. "No," he said. "They will kill them," I whispered. "Yes," he agreed. "If we do not give them a reason not to. I need 90 seconds. Can you give me 90 seconds? I did not understand what he was asking. I did not know what 90 seconds could accomplish against 3 Drashik in a sealed room with hostages and plasma rifles, but I looked at his face and saw something there that I had never seen directed at me before: trust. He was not asking me to understand his plan. He was asking me to believe that he had one. "Yes," I said. I stepped forward, slowly, with my hands visible and my chin raised. I addressed the Drache team leader in a voice that did not shake, because I was a princess of the Kaldeth bloodline, and my voice did not shake in front of enemies, no matter how badly my hands wanted to. "I invoke the right of formal parley," I said. "Under the Accords of Neutral Conduct, which the Drache Dominion ratified in the 3rd year of the current conflict, I am entitled to state the terms of my compliance before submitting to custody." The team leader's mandibles clicked in what I had learned to recognize as irritation. But the accords were binding. Even the Dratic observed them, if only because violating them would give the Galactic Council justification for broader military intervention that the Dominion could not afford. "Speak," the team leader said. I spoke. I recited the formal parley phrases slowly, deliberately, drawing each clause out to its full ceremonial length. Old Valorian was designed for exactly this kind of stalling. The ritual language was dense, self-referential, and loaded with subclauses that required acknowledgement from both parties before proceeding. I used every one. I invented subclauses that did not exist, and delivered them with such conviction that the Drache team leader had no basis to challenge their authenticity. I cited precedents from conflicts that had ended before the Drache Dominion existed. I referenced legal frameworks that I fabricated on the spot, with the fluency of someone who had spent her entire life watching politicians talk without saying anything. 50 seconds. 60. 70. I saw it before the Drache did. A shadow in the maintenance crawlspace above the ceiling. A panel shifting by millimeters. A darkness that was not architectural. 80 seconds. Declan dropped from the ceiling. The 2 flanking operatives died in the same heartbeat. I did not see exactly what he did, because he moved with a speed that my eyes could not track in the dim light of the compromised safe room. One moment there were 2 armed Drache guarding the entrance. The next moment they were on the floor, and Declan was already engaging the team leader. The fight was not like the others. The team leader was enhanced, faster, stronger, and armored in a way the standard operatives were not. Declan hit it 3 times before it responded, and each hit landed on reinforced plating that absorbed the impact without visible effect. The team leader swung a cybernetic arm that caught Declan across the chest and sent him backward into the wall hard enough to crack the stone behind him. He came off the wall and went back in. The exchange that followed lasted 12 seconds, and every one of them was brutal. The team leader had 4 arms and cybernetic speed, but Declan had desperation and a willingness to take damage that defied everything I understood about self-preservation. The team leader stabbed with a secondary blade, and Declan did something that made me gasp. He caught the blade, not deflected it, not dodged it. He grabbed it with his left hand and let it punch straight through his palm. His hand locked around the blade, trapping it. Blood ran down his wrist and dripped onto the floor. The team leader tried to pull free and could not, because the human's fingers had closed around the weapon like a vice, locked by pain and will and the absolute refusal to let go. For that single second, the weapon was anchored in human flesh and bone, and the operative's arm was extended, its guard open, its balance committed. Declan used the leverage. He pulled the team leader forward by its own blade, stepped inside its reach, and struck its throat with his right hand. The sound it made was like something breaking deep underground. The team leader fell. The blade slid free of Declan's hand in a wash of red. The 3 hostage guards stared. I stared. Declan stood in the middle of the ruined safe room, bleeding from 7 different wounds, his left hand a ruin, his breathing sharp and shallow, and he did not sit down. He did not lean against the wall. He activated his communication device with his good hand and contacted Commander Resek. "Compound is not secure," he said. His voice was steady. "I have neutralized the extraction team leader and 5 operatives. Confirm perimeter and sweep the eastern tunnels before you stand down." He closed the channel and turned to the 3 freed guards. "Get the princess to secondary cover. Now." One of the guards, a young lieutenant whose name I would later learn was Sorath, looked at Declan with an expression I recognized because I was wearing the same one. It was the expression of someone whose understanding of the universe had just been fundamentally rearranged. They took me to secondary cover. I went because Declan told me to, and because I had discovered, somewhere in the last 40 minutes, that I trusted his judgment more than my own when it came to staying alive. The last thing I saw before they led me around the corner was Declan, still standing, still refusing to sit, watching the corridor with his weapon in his undamaged hand, and his ruined hand hanging at his side, dripping red onto the white stone floor. I thought about what my father had asked the Terran Confederation for. Someone who could keep his daughter alive. And I wondered if my father had known what the Terran Confederation would actually send. Not a diplomat in borrowed armor. Not a political symbol. Not a ceremonial husband. A weapon. In human skin. With the steadiest hands I had ever seen. They kept Declan in the medical wing for 2 days. Valorian medicine was advanced beyond anything the Terran Confederation possessed. But it was calibrated for Valorian biology, and the medics struggled with his biochemistry in ways that frustrated them visibly. His blood clotted differently. His cellular structure responded to regenerative stimulation in patterns they had not encountered. The enzymes they used to accelerate tissue repair caused inflammatory reactions in his system that they had to counteract with secondary treatments that required tertiary adjustments, and the entire process became a chain of complications that left the senior physician visibly irritated. Then the Terran medical file arrived through diplomatic channels, and the irritation turned into something else entirely. I was present when the physician reviewed it. I watched her face change as she processed the data, cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something that looked close to alarm. "What is wrong?" I asked. "Nothing is wrong," she said slowly. "That is the problem. His tissue is regenerating on its own. The wound on his hand, the one that went through the palm, the bone and muscle are already rebuilding without therapeutic intervention. At this rate, he will have partial function within a week. Full function within 3. Is that unusual?" She looked at me with an expression I could not immediately interpret. "Your Highness, a wound of that severity in a Valorian would require 3 weeks of assisted healing with our best regenerative technology. This human is doing it on his own, without assistance. His body simply decided to repair the damage, and it is doing so at a rate that suggests this is not exceptional for his species. This is just what they do. I visited him that afternoon. He was sitting up in the medical bed, his left hand wrapped in a healing sheath that looked too small for the work it needed to do. His other wounds had been treated and sealed, and the color in his face was better than I expected. He looked tired, but it was the tiredness of someone who had been running on adrenaline for hours and had finally been forced to stop, not the exhaustion of someone whose body was giving out. The dynamic between us had changed, and we both knew it. I sat in the chair beside his bed without asking permission, and he did not remark on it. The distance I had established on our first night, the cold rules, the rigid boundaries, felt like artifacts from a different lifetime. "I have a question," I said. "Go ahead. Why did the Terran Confederation send you specifically? Of all the soldiers they could have chosen for this assignment, why you?" He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "They did not choose me. I volunteered." "Why?" I read the intelligence briefing on the Drache threat posture against the Valorian royal family. The pattern analysis was clear. Someone was going to try to take you. Not if, but when. The marriage treaty needed a military representative, and I decided that if someone was going to stand between a princess and an assassination team, it might as well be someone who had done it before. "You have done this before," I said. It was not a question. "This is my 7th protection detail." 7. He had been the last line of defense for 6 other people before me. 6 people whose lives had depended on his willingness to put his body between them and whatever was trying to end them. I thought about the scars I had seen on his torso during the fighting, the ones that were not from the palace attack, the old ones, layered and white, that spoke of years of accumulated damage absorbed on behalf of people whose names I would never know. "Did you keep them all alive?" I asked. "Yes." "At what cost?" He looked down at his bandaged hand. "At whatever cost it took." I sat with that for a moment, letting the weight of it settle. Then I asked the question that had been circling in my mind since the night he stood in my doorway. "Are you afraid? Ever?" He met my eyes, every time. "You do not look afraid. You looked calm in every moment last night. I watched you fight 6 Drache operatives, and your hands never shook until it was over." "The shaking is not about fear," he said. "The shaking is what happens when the adrenaline leaves. During the fight, my body suppresses everything that is not useful for survival. Pain, exhaustion, fear, it all gets pushed down and locked away so that I can function. Afterward, it all comes back at once. That is when the hands shake." He paused. "Being brave is not the absence of fear. That is something humans learn early. Being brave is being terrified and doing the job anyway because someone is depending on you." I thought about that for a long time after I left the medical wing. I had been raised in a culture that valued composure, control, and the suppression of weakness. Valorians did not admit to fear. Fear was a failure of discipline. My father would sooner step into vacuum without a suit than confess to being afraid in front of another living being. But Declan had just told me he was afraid every single time, and somehow, instead of making me think less of him, it made me think more. Because his fear was not a weakness he hid, it was a force he used. He was afraid, and he fought anyway, not because he did not feel the danger, but because he refused to let it dictate his response. I had never encountered that philosophy before. I did not know what to do with it. The political consequences of the Drache raid unfolded rapidly over the following days. The Valorian Security Council, which had dismissed Declan's warning about the extraction operation, was now forced to reckon with the fact that a human treaty consort had predicted the attack with perfect accuracy, while their own intelligence apparatus had missed it entirely. Lord Vesson, who had publicly mocked Declan at the court dinner, was conspicuously quiet during the emergency sessions that followed. My father summoned Declan on the 3rd day. I was not present for the conversation, but I learned afterward that my father had asked Declan a single question. "What else have we missed?" Declan had answered for 40 minutes without stopping. The result was unprecedented. Declan was invited to address the full Security Council, not as a consort, not as a political ornament, but as a tactical advisor. I sat in the observers' gallery again, but this time, the gallery was full. Every noble house had sent a representative. Word had spread about the human who had killed 6 Drache operatives with his hands and a sidearm, while the palace guard was still scrambling to respond. Declan stood at the central projection table, his left hand still in the healing sheath, and briefed the most powerful military body in the Valorian sovereignty on Drache infiltration patterns, counter-tactics, and something he called asymmetric warfare doctrine. The Valorian generals were skeptical. Their questions were pointed, sometimes hostile, designed to expose the limits of his knowledge and put this upstart human back in his decorative box. Declan answered everyone with data, specifics, and a calm confidence that never crossed the line into arrogance. He cited battle histories that the generals could verify. He referenced tactical analyses that aligned with intelligence they already had, but had not connected. He spoke their language, not Old Valorian, but the language of war, and he spoke it fluently. Then he presented his predictive model. He had built it in his head during his 2 days in the medical wing. No computational tools, no intelligence databases, no tactical software, just pattern recognition applied to the data he had absorbed from the tactical displays during the council sessions he had attended as a silent observer. The model predicted the next 3 most likely Drache actions against Valorian territory, ranked by probability, with estimated timelines and target profiles for each. The council received it with cold politeness. Several generals exchanged glances that I recognized as the look senior officers give each other when they believe someone has overstepped their competence. Within the hour, Valorian intelligence confirmed 2 of his 3 predictions independently. The room went very quiet. The glances the generals exchanged after that were very different. After the session, as the council members filed out with expressions that ranged from thoughtful to deeply unsettled, Lord Vesson paused beside Declan and said something I did not expect. "Commander Holt, I owe you an apology." Declan looked at him. "You do not," he said, "but I will accept it." Vesson nodded once, slowly, and left. I watched him go, and felt something complicated in my chest that I did not try to name. In the days that followed, Declan and I began spending time together outside of obligation. It started small. I offered to teach him proper Old Valorian pronunciation, partly because his attempts during the binding ceremony still made me wince, and partly because I wanted an excuse to sit in the same room with him without the pretense of security briefings or council sessions. He accepted with the same steady willingness he brought to everything. He was terrible at it. Old Valorian required harmonic undertones that the human vocal apparatus simply could not produce, and his attempts sounded like someone trying to sing underwater while gargling gravel. But he tried with a stubbornness that I was beginning to find endearing rather than frustrating. "Again," I would say, and he would try again, and fail again, and try again, and the dedication in his face never wavered, even as the sounds coming from his throat bore no resemblance to the language he was attempting to speak. In return, he taught me the basics of Terran hand-to-hand combat. We used the lower courtyard in the early mornings, before the court was awake and the palace filled with the political currents that made everything a performance. He showed me stances, strikes, and defensive techniques drawn from 6 human martial traditions, and as he walked me through each one, I began to understand something fundamental about the way humans thought about conflict. Every technique assumed I was the weaker opponent. Every stance was designed for someone who was smaller, slower, and more fragile than whatever they were facing. The philosophy was not about meeting force with force. It was about redirecting force, exploiting momentum, and finding the precise moment when a larger opponent's strength became a liability rather than an advantage. "Your combat arts assume you will win because you are better," Declan said, correcting my stance with a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Ours assume we will lose unless we find a way to cheat. That is why we are harder to predict. We are not fighting to prove a point. We are fighting to survive." I practiced the forms until my muscles burned and my hands ached. It was the first physical training I had done in years that did not feel like performance. It felt like preparation. On the 7th morning, Declan paused during our session and looked at me with an expression I had not seen before. It was softer than his usual focus, warmer. Something in the tightness of his features had relaxed, and for the first time I saw a glimpse of who he might be when he was not carrying the weight of someone else's survival. "You are good at this," he said. "I was raised by warriors," I reminded him. "You were raised by warriors who taught you to be graceful," he said. "I am teaching you to be dangerous. There is a difference." The warning came on a morning that had started like any other. A Dreyokrak battle fleet dropped out of faster-than-light transit at the edge of Valorian sovereign space. 43 warships, including a command carrier capable of coordinating simultaneous assaults across multiple systems, arranged in standard Draconic assault formation. They made no attempt to hide. They wanted to be seen. The Dominion's message was broadcast on all frequencies, in galactic common, with the flat, clicking precision that made Draconic communications sound like the ticking of a countdown. "Surrender the princess. Deliver her to a neutral transfer point within 48 hours. Comply, and the sovereignty would be spared further military action. Refuse, and the fleet would advance on the homeworld itself." The Security Council convened within the hour. The debate was immediate and fractured. The military commanders wanted to fight, the diplomatic corps wanted to negotiate, and a third faction, smaller but vocal, quietly suggested that perhaps compliance was the pragmatic choice. The princess was valuable, but was she more valuable than the millions of lives a Draconic assault fleet could end? Was one woman worth the risk of losing the homeworld? I sat in the gallery and listened to people discuss my life as though it were a line item on a balance sheet. I watched my father's face for some sign of what he was thinking, but his expression was locked behind that diplomatic mask, and I could not reach him. I noticed that he did not speak during the debate. He listened, and his silence was louder than anything the council members were saying. After the session, I found Declan in his quarters. He was standing at the window, looking out at the sky, as though he could see the Drache fleet hanging at the edge of the system, 43 warships waiting for an answer. "The council is considering giving me to them," I said. My voice was steady because I had decided it would be. The fear was there, heavy and cold in my chest, but I would not let it into my voice. I had learned that from him. Declan turned from the window. His face was calm. His eyes were not. Something burned behind them that I had not seen before, not even during the fighting. It was not rage. It was not desperation. It was something older and deeper. Something that looked like the expression of a man who had drawn a line in the ground and would die on it. "They are not getting you," he said. "They have 43 warships. I do not care if they have 400. You are one human, Declan." He looked at me, and the smile that crossed his face was the most dangerous thing I had ever seen on a living being. It was not a smile of amusement or confidence or bravado. It was the smile of someone who had done the math, found the odds impossible, and decided to ignore them entirely. "One human is usually enough," he said. Then he sat down, activated a secure communication channel to the Terran Confederation, and began speaking in rapid, clipped English that I could barely follow. I caught fragments: treaty clause, mutual defense provision, bonded citizen, legal jurisdiction. The words came fast and hard, and I heard responses coming back through the channel that matched his urgency. When he finished, he looked at me with those steady eyes and said, "Your Highness, when you married me, you did something the Drates did not anticipate. You gave the Terran Confederation legal standing to defend Valorian territory." "What do you mean?" "I mean that under the terms of our alliance treaty, a bonded Terran citizen is entitled to the full military protection of the Confederation. You are bonded to me. An attack on you is an attack on a Terran citizen's spouse. Which means the Drache are not threatening a Valorian princess. They are threatening the family of a soldier of the Terran Confederation." He paused, and the dangerous smile returned. "And we do not let that stand. Ever." 4 hours later, 6 Terran warships dropped out of slipspace at the edge of the Valorian system. I was on the command station when they arrived. The tactical display dominated the central deck, a massive holographic projection that showed every ship, every trajectory, every energy signature within the system. The Drache fleet filled the upper quadrant, 43 vessels strong, arrayed in the layered assault formation that had broken Valorian defensive lines twice in the last year. And then, at the periphery of the display, 6 new signatures appeared. Small, fast, running hot enough that their engine signatures blazed like new stars on the tactical screen. The Terran Battle Group. I looked at the display and felt something I had not expected. Not relief. Not hope. Confusion. 6 ships, I said to Declan, against 43. Declan was standing beside me at the tactical station. He had refused to wait in the consort wing. My father had attempted to order him to remain there, citing safety protocols and the chain of command. Declan had looked at the sovereign of the Valorian Empire and said, with perfect respect and absolute immovability, with all due respect, my wife is on this station, and I will be wherever she is. My father had let him stay. I think he recognized something in Declan that he had spent 30 years cultivating in himself. The quality that separated leaders from administrators. The willingness to be where the danger was. Not because you could change the outcome, but because the people you were responsible for deserved to see you standing beside them when the worst arrived. 6 ships, I said again, because the number refused to make sense. Watch, Declan said. The Drake fleet, which had been advancing at full combat speed toward the Valorian homeworld, did something I had never seen in 6 years of war. It slowed down. 43 warships, backed by a command carrier with enough firepower to glass a continent, slowed their advance when 6 Terran vessels appeared on their tactical display. They are afraid, I said. I could not keep the disbelief out of my voice. They are cautious, Declan corrected. Fear comes later. They have fought us before, and the ones who survived remember what it cost them. The engagement began 17 minutes later. The Drake commander, whatever internal calculus it had performed, decided that 43-6 was sufficient odds and ordered the advance to resume. Perhaps it believed the Terran ships were a bluff, a token show of force designed to buy time for negotiation. Perhaps it simply could not justify retreating from 6 enemy vessels in front of its entire fleet. Whatever its reasoning, it was wrong. What followed was the most terrifying and extraordinary thing I have ever witnessed. The 6 Terran ships did not fight the way fleets were supposed to fight. Galactic naval doctrine was built on distance, formation, and coordinated fire. Ships maintained separation, presented their strongest shielding to the enemy, and relied on overlapping fields of fire to wear down opposing vessels through attrition. Every species in the galaxy fought this way. It was how war in space was conducted. It was rational, measured, and predictable. The Terrans did none of this. They charged. 6 ships accelerated directly into the Drake formation, at speeds that exceeded every known safety threshold for manned vessels. They flew so close to the Drake warships that their shield envelopes actually overlapped, creating interference patterns that disrupted targeting systems on both sides. But the Terrans had trained for this. They had practiced fighting in the gaps between enemy shields, in the dead zones where targeting solutions broke down, and combat became raw, close-range savagery. The Drake had not. I watched from the tactical display as a Terran frigate designated Harrogate executed a maneuver that the Valorian tactical officer beside me called physically impossible. It dove between 2 Drake destroyers, rolled perpendicular to the engagement plane, and fired broadside salvos into both ships simultaneously, at a range so close that the Drake point defense systems could not track fast enough to respond. Both destroyers took critical damage. Atmosphere vented from hull breaches that spanned their midsections. The Harrogate took hits in return, 3 hull breaches across 2 forward decks. Damage warnings scrolled across the tactical display in urgent red text. The ship did not retreat. It did not slow down. It came about, accelerated again, and drove straight at a 3rd Drake vessel. They are insane, the tactical officer whispered beside me. They are human, Declan said. The Valorian fleet, coordinated by tactical data streaming from the Terran battle group, entered the engagement 8 minutes later. The Valorian ships were larger, better shielded, and more heavily armed than the Terran vessels. They were beautiful ships, built with the precision and elegance that defined Valorian engineering, but they had never been able to break the Drake formation in 6 years of trying. The swarming coordination that made the Drake so dangerous relied on tight formation flying and synchronized targeting across dozens of vessels. Every time the Valorian fleet had engaged, the Drake had reformed, adapted, and overwhelmed through sheer coordination. But the Terran charge had shattered both. The Drake formation was in chaos. Individual ships were maneuvering independently, their coordination disrupted, their tactical network fragmented by the interference from overlapping shield envelopes, and the confusion of close-range combat they had never trained for. The Valorians exploited every gap. Fleet Commander Solarin, who had been fighting the Drakeich for 6 years and had never once broken their formation, drove 3 battlecruisers through the center of the Drake line and split the fleet in 2. The halves could not recombine. The Terran ships were between them, still fighting, still pressing, still refusing to behave in ways the Drakeich tactical doctrine could predict or counter. Then the Harrogate did something that silenced every voice on the command station. Its hull was breached across 3 decks. Its primary weapons were offline. Its engine output was at 40% and falling. Fires burned in sections that the damage control systems could no longer reach. By any rational military standard, it was done. A Valorian ship in that condition would have disengaged and withdrawn to safe distance for emergency repair. A Drake ship would have been abandoned by its crew, who would redistribute to undamaged vessels. The Harrogate accelerated to full speed. It turned toward a Drakewick destroyer that was repositioning to bring its weapons to bear on Solarin's exposed flank. It aimed its broken, burning hull at the center of the enemy ship, and it did not change course. The collision tore both ships apart. The tactical display showed the twin signatures merge and then fragment into debris clouds that expanded outward like a violent bloom, scattering wreckage across a volume of space so large that nearby ships had to adjust course to avoid the field. The command station went silent. Every officer, every technician, every diplomat who had been watching the battle unfold, all of them stopped. The hum of the station's systems was the only sound. "The crew," I said. My voice came from very far away. "Evacuated," Declan said. 30 seconds before impact. They planned it. Every member of that crew knew the ship was going to be used as a weapon, and they launched escape pods before the collision. The maneuver is called a dead-hand strike. You remove the crew, set the engines to maximum, and use the mass of the ship itself as a weapon delivery system. They sacrificed their ship. They sacrificed a machine to destroy a threat. Humans do not confuse the tool with the user. He paused, and something fierce and proud moved across his face. The crew is alive. They are sitting in escape pods right now, watching their ship take a Drake destroyer with it, and every single one of them is proud. I stared at the debris field on the tactical display, and I understood something about humans that I had been circling for days without quite reaching. They were not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the fastest, the most advanced, or the most elegant, but they possessed something that none of the other species I had encountered could match. They were willing to spend everything they had, their ships, their bodies, their comfort, their safety, to protect the things they cared about. Not because they did not value what they spent, because they valued what they were protecting more. It was also in that moment, watching the battle rage on the tactical display, that I noticed something in the Valorian command station's data stream that made my blood go cold. A secondary signal, buried beneath the station's standard communications traffic, a dormant code string that had been embedded in the station's shield management system, waiting for a specific trigger. I recognized it because Declan had taught me what Drake data infiltration signatures looked like during one of our morning conversations. The Drake had not just sent a fleet, they had planted a kill code in the station's systems, timed to activate at the critical moment of the engagement. When triggered, it would drop the station's shields for exactly 11 seconds, long enough for a concentrated Drake strike to destroy the station and everyone on it. Including me. Including my father. Including Fleet Commander Solarin and the entire Valorian command structure. I did not call for help. There was no time. The trigger signal could activate at any moment, and the station's security team was focused on the battle, not on signals analysis. I moved to a secondary terminal, accessed the shield management subsystem with my royal authorization codes, and began tracing the dormant code string through the system architecture. My hands were shaking. My heart was hammering against my ribs. But I thought about Declan standing in my doorway with steady hands and steady eyes, and I breathed, and I worked. I found the kill code nested inside a routine maintenance subroutine that had been uploaded during a system update 3 weeks before the Drachik fleet arrived. It was elegant, nearly invisible, designed to activate on a specific frequency pulse from the Drachik command carrier. I could not delete it without triggering a cascade failure in the shield system, but I could redirect it. I rewired the code's output pathway so that instead of dropping the shields, the trigger signal would reinforce them, doubling the shield frequency for the same 11-second window. The trigger activated 6 minutes later. The shields surged instead of falling. The Drach strike that had been timed to the shield drop hit reinforced barriers and dissipated harmlessly. When I reported what I had done to the tactical officer, he stared at me with the blank expression of someone who could not process what they were hearing. Then he reported it to Fleet Commander Solarin, who looked across the command deck at me with an expression I had never seen directed at the third daughter. It was the look officers give someone who has just saved their ship. The battle turned decisively after that. The Drach fleet, having lost a third of its vessels, its formation shattered, its coordinated strike neutralized, and its hidden kill code turned against it, began to withdraw. Not an orderly retreat, not a tactical repositioning. Ships breaking away individually, abandoning their fellows, running for the system boundary at maximum speed. Fleet Commander Solarin's voice came over the command channel, steady and controlled, but with an undercurrent of something that sounded like awe. All ships, the Drach fleet is in full retreat. Hold formation, do not pursue. Let them carry the memory of this back to the Dominion. The command station erupted. Officers who had held their composure through hours of combat let it go in a wave of relief and disbelief. Valorians embraced. Some wept. Somewhere below me, I heard someone shouting Declan's name, and I realized it was Lieutenant Sorath, the young guard from the safe room, who had somehow made it to the command station and was standing with a group of soldiers who were cheering. I did not cheer. I stood at the tactical station, with my hands gripping the railing and my heart hammering in my chest, and I looked at the man standing beside me. Declan was watching the display. His face was calm, his hands were steady, but I could see the exhaustion behind his eyes, the accumulated weight of 31 hours without sleep, the hours of planning and calculating and hoping that the gamble would work, and the relief, the immeasurable relief, that it had. "It is over," I said. "For now," he said. "They will remember this. They will think twice before coming back. And if they come back," he looked at me, "then we will be here." I crossed the distance between us. I did not think about it. I did not calculate the political implications or consider what the assembled officers and nobles and diplomats from 6 allied species would think. I took his hand, his right hand, the undamaged one, and I held it in front of everyone on that command station. Not as a political gesture, not as a treaty obligation, as a choice. He looked at our joined hands, then at me. His expression shifted, and for just a moment, the soldier was gone, and there was just a man, tired and wounded and far from home, who had risked everything for someone he barely knew, because he had decided she was worth protecting. "Thank you," I said. "You do not need to thank me." "I know. I am choosing to." He squeezed my hand, gently, because his grip was still careful around his healing wounds, but the steadiness was there. It was always there. In the days that followed, the political landscape shifted in ways that would echo for years. The Terran Confederation and the Valorian sovereignty signed an expanded defense pact that went far beyond the original treaty. Terran military advisors were embedded in every Valorian fleet command. Joint tactical doctrines were developed that combined Valorian precision with Terran adaptability. The alliance that had been born from desperation became something stronger, a partnership built on mutual respect, and the shared memory of a battle where 6 ships and 40 fought side by side. The crew of the Harrogate were recovered from their escape pods, every single one of them alive and whole. When they were brought aboard the Valorian command station, Fleet Commander Solarin personally met them at the docking port and saluted them in the Valorian fashion, right hand over the heart, fingers spread. It was the highest honor a Valorian military officer could offer to a foreign soldier, and Solarin gave it without hesitation. The crew's captain, a woman named Lieutenant Commander Priya Okonkwo, returned the salute with a Terran one. Crisp, clean, steady. 2 officers from 2 species, standing in the docking port of a station they had defended together, saluting each other across the divide that the galaxy had always placed between their kinds. The image of that exchange was broadcast across the sovereignty. It became the defining image of the alliance, and the moment that changed how Valorians thought about the species they had once dismissed as barely civilized. I addressed the Valorian court on the 9th day after the battle. The binding hall was full again. The same faces that had watched me marry a human with barely concealed contempt, now watching me with expressions I could not easily categorize. Curiosity, uncertainty, and in some faces, the reluctant, uncomfortable stirring of respect for something they did not yet fully understand. I stood on the same altar platform where I had taken my vows, and I spoke without notes, without rehearsal, and without the diplomatic mask I had worn for my entire adult life. I was told I was being given a human, I said. I believed that meant I was being given a lesser being, a species the galaxy looks down on, a people we measure by what they lack. They are not as fast as us. They are not as strong. They do not live as long, or see as far, or hear the frequencies that we hear. By every metric we use to rank the species of this galaxy, humans fall short. I paused. The hall was silent. 300 faces looked up at me from the crescent of seats below, and I felt the weight of the resonance crystal around me, amplifying every word, carrying it to every corner of the ancient room. I was wrong. Not about the metrics, about what they measure. We have spent centuries evaluating species by their biology, their technology, their psychic capacity, their elegance. And in doing so, we have overlooked the one metric that actually matters: what a species is willing to endure for the people it has chosen to protect. I looked at the faces before me. Lord Vesson, who had mocked a human at a dinner table and been silenced by a story. Fleet Commander Solaran, who had watched 6 ships charge 43 and found something he had not known he was missing. The young officers and guards who had stood beside Terran soldiers in the corridors of the palace and the decks of the command station, and had learned that courage does not require elegance. My father, watching from the sovereign's chair with an expression I had never seen on his face before, something raw and unguarded that looked like pride and regret, and the quiet relief of a man who had gambled his daughter's life on a species the galaxy did not respect and had been right. I watched 6 human ships charge into 43 Drache warships and break their formation, I said. I watched a frigate crew evacuate their vessel and fly it into an enemy destroyer, because that was the math that saved the most lives. I watched one human man stand in the doorway of my chambers with a sidearm and a willingness to die for someone he had known for 5 days. Not because he loved me, not because I had earned his loyalty, but because he had decided that protecting me was the right thing to do, and nothing in this galaxy was going to stop him from doing it. My voice was steady, my hands were not. I let them shake. I had learned from a human that showing what you felt was not weakness. It was the most honest thing a person could do. I was told I was given a human. I was wrong. I was given a warrior. And I have never been more proud to stand beside anyone in my life. The hall was silent for a long-held breath. Then Lieutenant Soreth, standing in the back row of the military section, began to clap. Not the measured, rhythmic applause of Valorian tradition. A different kind. Loud, unrestrained, and raw. The kind of applause he had learned from the Terran soldiers he had been working alongside for the past week. The kind that said more than any formal acknowledgement ever could. It spread, through the military section first, then the diplomatic corps, then the noble houses. Not everyone joined. Some hands remained folded, some faces remained skeptical, some members of the old guard sat with expressions that said they would need more than one speech to change 9,000 years of cultural assumptions. But enough. Enough to fill the hall with a sound I had never heard in the binding hall before. Real applause. The kind that comes not from tradition, but from feeling something that demands to be expressed. I looked across the hall to where Declan stood at the back, in his borrowed ceremonial armor that still did not fit properly, his left hand still wrapped in the healing sheath, his face still carrying the careful composure of a man who was not yet sure where he belonged in a galaxy that had never made a place for him. He caught my eye. He smiled. His hands were steady. I smiled back, and in that moment, standing on the altar platform of the oldest hall in the Valorian sovereignty, surrounded by the sound of applause that was changing the shape of the future, I understood something that changed everything. My father had not traded me to the humans. He had given me to the one species in the galaxy that would protect me, not because of what I was worth, but because of who I was. And in doing so, he had given the sovereignty something it had been missing for a very long time. Not a fleet, not a weapon, not a strategy. Hope. The kind of hope that only comes from watching someone stand in the doorway when the darkness arrives and refuse to move. The human kind,